Hey guys, Zach Draskovic here. The bass spawn is starting to wrap up on Guntersville, but don't worry, I have some new tournament winning patterns for you. To start with, I'm going to cover the other spawn, and that is the shad spawn. Now, the shad spawn is one of the trickiest bites to figure out, but if you're a tournament angler, you cannot afford to ignore it. Now, if you don't know what the shad spawn is, the shad spawn is a little bit different from the bass and the brim spawn, which I will cover. The shad spawn, the shad don't make beds like bass do and stay put and defend them. The shad under low light conditions will go and they'll make these balls. You'll see them swirling, doing like a little tornado action, and they will lay their eggs on anything sticking up out of the water. Now, because they only do it in these low light conditions, your window of opportunity is very narrow. These fish are going to be caught early in the morning or later in the evening. So if you're a tournament angler, you need to find that shad spawn quickly, first thing in the morning. And if you do, you can have your tournament winning stringer caught in the first 30 minutes of daylight. Where do you look for these shad spawning? The shad spawn is a little bit more difficult to find because these bait fish just kind of roam around, and they can burn you sometimes. You'll find a tournament winning stringer, and then you'll come back the next day and the shad will be completely gone. So keep that in mind. Have a backup plan if you're a tournament angler. But these shad are going to spawn on little pieces of grass, riprap, docks, wood, anything sticking up out of the water. The first place I'm going to look for shad spawn is around points and humps in front of spawning areas, because you don't want to find a shad spawn that doesn't have feeding fish. You can absolutely find, just because you find the shad spawn does not necessarily mean there's going to be bass there. You want to find a shad spawn that's near a spawning area, because those fish will already be schooled up for you. They'll be post-spawn and hungry, and they will be destroying those shad. So look for points and humps that have some emergent vegetation or some wood or some rock in front of spawning areas. That's going to be my first place that I'm going to look for shad spawn. The next way I'm going to search for a good shad spawn is when I'm driving out early in the morning is looking for birds. Now, birds will be a dead giveaway, either seagulls flying down and hitting the shad that are spawning near the surface, or looking for a stretch of bank that has a lot of herons. If you see a bunch of herons standing close together along the bank, that is a dead giveaway that there's a shad spawn going on in that area. Now, if you miss the early morning hours and you still need to find where the shad spawn may be the next day for your tournament, you can go and you can use your imaging and go along the creek channels near some of these humps and points and look for big groups of shad. If you're not good with your imaging, one of the easiest ways, and we'll go ahead and jump into baits here. One of the easiest ways to find shad spawn without using any electronics or without counting on birds to point you in the right direction is just chucking and winding a spinnerbait. The spinnerbait is one of the best lures to catch bass on during the shad spawn, and it is a great way to search for the shad spawn. When you cast and you reel in a spinnerbait, if there's a shad spawn going on, those shad, as you're reeling it in, you'll feel them. They'll be bumping. They'll be hitting this spinnerbait, and they'll be following it in. So if you have shad following in a spinnerbait, that's a dead giveaway that there is or was a shad spawn going on in that area. So when I use a spinnerbait for the shad spawn, I'm gonna typically throw double willow. I think it imitates the shad better. And I'm either going to use some kind of boot tail as a trailer, or I'm going to have a trailer hook. A lot of the times, those fish during the shad spawn, you're going to get a lot of slashing bites. So a trailer hook is is really key to use during the shad spawn. And that's one of the best trailers to use, is a good 3 or 4 aught hook at the end to make sure that you get those fish that just slash at your bait. So that's going to be number one. If I just had to pick one lure to throw during the shad spawn, that would definitely be a spinnerbait. All right, I said the spinnerbait was my number one choice of lures for the shad spawn, but that's just strictly for a tournament-minded angler. If you are allowed to use an Alabama rig, there you cannot argue with the math that 5 hooks are better than 1. And don't take my word for it. Ask my mom.
First, double, triple, 3.
So if I can't get a spinnerbait through, I'm gonna be throwing a chatterbait. Chatterbait is a great imitator. You still get that little bit of flash and thump to differentiate your lure from the millions of shad that you're trying to compete with. So if the grass is too high up in the water column, or if there's a lot of floating stuff, a chatterbait can get through cleanly, or that spinnerbait cannot. So that would be my number 2 choice if I couldn't throw a spinnerbait. And if it is just super nasty and you can't even get a chatterbait through, another lure that works very well is a swim jig. Now I prefer either a flapping trailer like this, or a swim bait as my trailer for a swim jig. But a lot of people do really well with just the Alabama shake, using just a chunk type trailer and just shaking it as they come in. I'm a little bit crippled up, so I can't wear myself out doing that. I like just a chuck and wind lure. So this is what I would use if I can't get the chatterbait or the spinnerbait through. Now the next lure that I would use for covering water, looking for a shad spawn or catching these shad spawn fish, is a horny toad. Now I really like a horny toad. Most of the warm weather months, I really like a horny toad during the shad spawn because it allows you to come through cleanly where other lures can't. You cover a lot of water. The most efficient way to cover shallow vegetation is going to be with a topwater lure. So this is a great lure that gives you that flapping action, that noise that those little legs make as they're hitting the water. I think really imitates the spawning shad very well. And you can bump it's very weedless, so it allows you to bump up against the vegetation and really imitate those spawning shad very well. So for my number 1 topwater choice during the shad spawn on Guntersville is going to be a horny toad. Now you can also do really well with a buzzbait. Now I prefer the horny toad because it allows you to get into places that a buzzbait cannot. But if it's a little bit choppy, real windy, and that horny toad is not standing out, I will definitely pick up a buzzbait. I like a good head knocker, and you see I have that trailer hook. I'm always going to be using a trailer hook with a spinnerbait and a buzzbait during the shad spawn. Now my last lure that I'm going to use during the shad spawn is going to be a Squarebill crankbait. Now Squarebill is great around the grass and really imitates those shad running through. That thump that it gives off will go and differentiate it from the millions of shad around it. You can reel this down, and when you hit the grass, pause it. If you get caught, rip it free, and that can trigger some killer reaction bites. So I'm going to be throwing a Squarebill crankbait a lot when I'm fishing around the shad spawn. I prefer a silent Squarebill. My favorite Squarebill, I didn't have it with me here, is probably a BDS-4. That's my Lucky Craft BDS-4 is my number 1 Squarebill for fishing around the shad spawn. And if you notice, my color choice was very, very simple. Everything some shade of white. When you're fishing the shad spawn, you don't have to choose like a bright, blinding white, but you need some kind of white or gray to imitate the shad. You cannot go wrong fishing some shade of white during the shad spawn. And you see, most of the lures that I chose and the techniques, really all of them are power fishing techniques. And that's because when you're fishing the shad spawn, you have the low light conditions working in your favor, and you're trying to make your lure stand out from millions of little bait fish. Now there are times where you do have to go a little bit more subtle, and if you absolutely have to, if you can't get bit, downsize and using a little swim bait or underspin or maybe a small fluke would be maybe my panic button lures. But typically you're going to want to use something with a little flash, a little thump to make sure that you're standing out from all the bait that's around you. The shad spawn can be very tricky. Fish these areas, use these lures, and I'm sure you'll load the boat.